This is the last video for chapter 23, and I'm going to start it with an animation from the textbook that discusses what we've been going over, the different causes of evolutionary change. And it's using insects to illustrate the different concepts.
We will use a hypothetical insect population to illustrate four causes of evolutionary change: genetic drift, gene flow, mutation, and natural selection. Our insect population consists of 100 individuals, some red and some green. The green allele is dominant, capital G. The red allele recessive, little g. The bar graphs show the frequencies of green, capital G, and red, little g, alleles. The frequencies of homozygous dominant, capital G, heterozygous, capital G, little g, and homozygous recessive, little g, individuals, and the number of green and red individuals in the population. Assume that our starting population is at Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Now let's look at some hypothetical scenarios that demonstrate four causes of evolutionary change. A windstorm has dramatically reduced our insect population. Such a small population is subject to genetic drift, a random change that occurs in a small gene pool due to sampling errors in the propagation of alleles. It is difficult to predict the allele frequencies from one generation to the next in a small population because chance plays a greater role in allele distribution. By chance, only red alleles were passed on to the next generation. Note that the increase in the frequency of the red allele and red insects had nothing to do with any particular advantage of being that color. The increase was purely due to chance, hence the term genetic drift. Chance occurrences like this are much more likely to affect a small population, like this one.
Gene flow is change in the gene pool due to migration of fertile individuals into or out of a population. Most populations are not completely isolated, and migration of individuals, or gametes as in plant pollen, can alter the gene pool. Mostly green insects left the population, and mostly red insects migrated in from elsewhere, increasing the frequency of the small g allele. As a result, the next generation has more red individuals. Mutations are random changes in an organism's DNA. A new mutation that is transmitted in gametes can immediately change the gene pool by substituting one allele for another. Imagine that we can see mutations happening, shown here by yellow flashes. Mutation can change a red allele into a green one, or a green allele into a red one. In this scenario, mutations slightly increase the proportion of red alleles in the gene pool, and thus red phenotypes in the next generation. Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium requires that all individuals in a population be equal in their abilities to survive and reproduce. This condition is probably never met, because individuals vary and some variants leave more offspring than others. This differential reproductive success is called natural selection. Natural selection increases the frequencies of some alleles and phenotypes and decreases the frequencies of others. Watch the birds preying on the insects. How will predation affect the genetic structure of the next generation and the evolution of the insects? The birds could see the red insects more easily against the background, so they caught a disproportionate number of the red bugs. This reduced the frequency of the red alleles in the gene pool, increased the frequency of green alleles, and similarly altered the relative numbers of green and red individuals in the population. Over time, this process of natural selection adapts a population to its environment. Under pressure of predation, the insects are becoming more and more green.
Okay, so that was a great summary of the different forces that affect evolution and how there are changes from generation to generation. And this again is a graphic showing the different types of selection that can occur. So we define directional selection again as one that is going to favor a more extreme version of the allele combinations out there. And there's stabilizing selection, which is the one that favors the middle of the road alleles. And then there's disruptive, which only favors the two extremes. And the examples we have here are the neck's length of a giraffe or the size of a horse, where one extreme is greatly favored. Birth weight for humans, the middle is the best. Being too little at birth is not a good thing, and also there are risk factors with being too large. So the middle is the most favorable combination here. And the rock pocket mice has the two extremes that do best. So another concept I want to make sure you understand is coevolution, and that's when two or more species reciprocally affect each other's evolution. So an example of this is a predator and prey relationship, a disease and host relationship. These are two species that are going to affect each other's evolution. They're going to place some sort of selection force on the other population, and in that way have an effect on the outcome of the evolution of that population. This is most common among competitive species. Also, it's also apparent when you have mutualism. So for example, if a pollinator is very well suited to a particular flower, they're both going to benefit from that relationship and have a better chance of survival and much better reproductive success. So those are characteristics that will ensure that their genes are going to be passed on to the next generations. So natural selection cannot fashion a perfect organism. It can only act on the existing variations, so which alleles are actually present. And it's limited by historical constraints, which is what has led to the variations that are present. Adaptations are often compromises, and it's actually chance and natural selection in the environment interacting together that comes up with this balance of what we see as evolution. And that is it for chapter 23.